In a recent landmark study on cancer detection, researchers were looking at this highly advanced artificial intelligence model, and it was analyzing lymph node images to detect metastatic breast cancer.
Right, a very complex task.
Exactly. And working entirely on its own, the AI misdiagnosed patients about 7.5% of the time, which, sounds okay until you look at the control group.
Right, the human doctors.
Yeah. The expert human pathologists doing the exact same task, they only misdiagnose patients 3.5% of the time. But here is the really crazy part. When the hospital designed a workflow that forced the human and the AI to collaborate, the error rate plummeted to 0.5%.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an 85% reduction in errors compared to just the human doctor alone.
Which honestly completely shatters the dominant narrative we see every day. I mean, the headlines constantly scream that, knowledge work is dead and the machine is coming to take your chair.
Yeah, totally.
But that 85% reduction wasn't achieved by firing the pathologist. It was achieved by engineering this highly specific partnership.
And that partnership is, well, that's the entire focus of our deep dive today. We're looking at a fascinating paper by Jonathan H. Westover, and it's titled The Centaur Organization, Designing Human AI Symbiosis.
It's a great paper.
It really is. And our mission today for you listening is to basically cut through the panic-inducing Silicon Valley hype. We want to show you how the most successful cutting-edge companies are actually designing for complementarity.
Yeah, they aren't looking for a cheap substitute for human labor.
Right. They're building something that looks much more like a centaur.
The mythical creature, right.
Yeah.
Half human, half horse.
Yeah.
It is really the perfect visual anchor for Westover's research. You take the raw, galloping computational horsepower of an ML model.
The horse part.
Exactly. And you seamlessly fuse it with the uniquely human upper half.
Yeah.
The empathy, the strategic vision, the complex contextual judgment.
Right, yeah.
And Westover pulls from this deep well of management and information systems data to demonstrate that this isn't just some science fiction thought experiment.
It's real.
It's the defining practical management challenge of the next decade. Because executives who view AI merely as a mechanism for headcount reduction, well, they're playing a losing game. Durable, long-term value comes from symbiosis.
So let's look at the hard performance data backing that up, because that breast cancer study, it isn't an isolated incident. The very concept of a centaur in this context actually goes back to the chessboard.
Oh, right, Kasparov.
Yeah. After Garry Kasparov famously lost to IBM's Deep Blue, he didn't just conclude that human chess players were suddenly obsolete. He actually helped pioneer Centaur chess, which is a format where humans and machines team up.
And the results of that were wild.
Completely wild. What the data showed empirically was that a relatively average human paired with a capable algorithm could routinely demolish a standalone supercomputer, and they would absolutely crush a standalone human grandmaster.
And we see the exact same phenomenon playing out in high-stakes finance, too. I mean, consider the venture capital world, right?
Yeah.
Which is notoriously dependent on human intuition and, networking.
Oh, yeah. Lots of gut feelings in VC.
Exactly. But a firm called Correlation Ventures managed to compress their entire investment evaluation cycle down to a mere 2 weeks.
2 weeks? That's insane.
Right. And they did it by applying predictive AI to crunch massive historical data sets. So financial metrics, market trends, founder histories, all that stuff. But, and this is the key, they actively retained holistic human review for the final shortlisted opportunities.
So the AI does the heavy lifting up front.
Yes, it acts as a massive filtration system, which allows the humans to apply their judgment only where it matters most.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a ruthless corporate executive, all right?
Uh-oh. Okay, go for it.
If I'm looking at my quarterly P&L statement, automation is supposed to be fundamentally about efficiency and cost saving, right? So why wouldn't I just fire the entire pathology department or all those junior VC analysts? Wait, hear me out. I take the slightly worse 7.5% error rate from the AI, but I save tens of millions of dollars in salaries and benefits. Isn't insisting on keeping the human in the loop kind of like, I don't know, buying a $20,000 industrial dishwasher but demanding your staff scrub all the plates by hand first?
I mean, that perspective is incredibly common, but the paper explicitly warns against it. Westover references the dangers of Taylorism, which, if you're not familiar, is that old industrial era obsession.
The assembly line stuff, right?
Exactly. Heavily documented by researchers like Mumford back in 1994. It's this obsession with breaking jobs down into tiny, repetitive, mindless tasks just to squeeze out a few pennies of short-term efficiency.
Right.
And the initial cost savings you get from pure labor substitution, they're a mirage.
A mirage because the quality of the work degrades.
Because organizations are complex socio-technical systems, right?
Yeah.
Slashing headcount for the sake of an immediate P&L boost is deeply corrosive over a 5-year horizon.
How so?
Well, when you simply substitute humans with algorithms, you erode all the tacit organizational knowledge, that unwritten, intuitive know-how that keeps a company functioning when things don't go according to plan.
Oh, like when the manual doesn't cover the problem?
Precisely.
Well,
Furthermore, contemporary AI systems, they don't operate in a vacuum. They depend on continuous human input. They need people to provide training data, to evaluate bizarre edge cases, and to interpret whether a model's output is actually actionable in the real world.
so if you fire everyone, the machine eventually breaks anyway.
Right. If you eliminate the human workforce, the AI's performance eventually degrades, the informal networks that coordinate real work just collapse, and you're left with a completely hollowed-out company.
Okay, but that creates a really interesting logistical problem then, because if keeping the human in the loop is the ultimate goal to prevent that collapse, how do you actually divide the labor?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, because you can't just split a job down the middle and tell the algorithm, hey, take the morning shift. Let's imagine a business as a high-stakes Michelin star restaurant. We have to figure out who is doing what. Like in a kitchen, you don't have the head chef and the prep cook both chopping the same onion.
No, of course not. You divide the labor based on the nature of the task.
Exactly. So how do we do that with AI?
Well, the paper relies on a framework by Jarahi that does exactly this. But instead of dividing physical tasks like chopping onions, it surgically decomposes the cognitive decision-making process itself.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So Jarahi breaks organizational challenges down into 3 categories. You've got complexity, equivocality, and uncertainty. And your restaurant analogy actually maps onto these perfectly.
Oh, awesome. Okay, let's build that out then. So in my kitchen scenario, the AI is the ultimate prep cook handling the complexity. It's stationed in the back, slicing 1,000 onions in exactly 60 seconds.
I'd like to see that.
Right. It's monitoring the thermodynamics of 6 different ovens simultaneously, and it's cross-referencing the pantry inventory against literally every recipe ever written in human history. A human brain just cannot hold that many variables at once.
Exactly. That is the literal definition of complexity. Too many interconnected variables, massive data sets, and the need for high-speed information retrieval. AI undoubtedly wins there.
Okay, but the human is the head chef handling the equivocality. And equivocality, that's about divergent interpretations, right? Like when the facts are clear, but people disagree on what they actually mean.
Right, the subjective stuff.
Yeah. So the head chef is tasting the soup. They know the city's most brutal food critic is sitting out there at table 4. They understand the culinary vibe of the neighborhood, and they have to negotiate with the sous chef about whether the dish needs more salt. The AI prep cook, it can't taste the culture of the dining room.
Humans win equivocality because we excel at negotiation, at coalition building, and persuasion. And what happens when the power suddenly goes out in the middle of a Friday night dinner rush?
Well, the human navigates the uncertainty, right? There's no historical data for a localized blackout on a Friday night with a VIP in the house. You just have to use your gut, grab some candles, and lead the staff.
That is uncertainty in Jarahi's framework. It is fundamentally about missing information. There's no precedent, so the AI cannot calculate a probability.
Makes sense.
Humans rely on intuition trained by years of messy, tacit experience to fill in those gaps. And we see this exact division of labor implemented brilliantly at Memorial Sloan Kettering in their work with IBM Watson, which Westover details pretty heavily in the paper.
Oh, right. They effectively built our Michelin star kitchen, but inside an oncology ward.
Exactly.
So I imagine Watson was acting as the prep cook, taking on all the massive complexity of medical data.
It had to. I mean, no single human oncologist can read the thousands of medical research articles published every single month, review decades of electronic medical records, and synthesize a lifetime of clinicians' notes.
Yeah, that's impossible.
Right. So Watson parsed all that complexity to discern really subtle cancer patterns and suggest potential courses of treatment. It handled the variables. But the final clinical judgment, the equivocality subtask, remained entirely with the human oncologist.
Right, because Watson cannot sit down with a patient and discuss how a harsh chemotherapy regimen might impact their ability to, attend their daughter's wedding next month.
Exactly. The human doctor takes over to weigh those personal values. They evaluate the patient's emotional state, their family support system, their unique tolerance for
A
risk.
human element.
Right. The AI handles the statistical complexity, and the human resolves the emotional and ethical equivocality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Mhm.
Because identifying the division of labor on paper, that makes perfect sense. The friction comes when you try to implement this on like a random Tuesday afternoon in a real corporate
Oh,
office.
absolutely.
How do major organizations practically deploy these Centaur models without their workforce either revolting or, conversely, just blindly deferring to some black box algorithm?
Well, implementing the Centaur model requires a completely new set of organizational capabilities, which Westover outlines as the Centaur playbook.
Okay.
And the first and arguably most difficult pillar is capability building, specifically creating hybrid talent models. General Electric provides a fascinating case study here.
Oh, I remember this. When GE was transitioning into a digital industrial company.
Right. And the obvious move for them would have been to just hire thousands of data scientists straight from Silicon Valley and parachute them into their jet engine factories to optimize the machinery.
But they didn't do that. They took a much more difficult path. They took their existing aerospace engineers and physicists, like the people who had spent 20 years actually listening to the hum of a physical turbine.
Giant experts.
Yeah. And they put them through rigorous internal data analytics certification programs. They basically upskilled the mechanics to be data literate.
Because they realized a profound truth about the nature of knowledge. Tacit domain expertise that instinct an engineer develops about how metal behaves under extreme thermal stress that is significantly harder to teach than applied machine learning.
You can't just fast track that.
No, you cannot download 20 years of factory floor intuition into a software developer's brain. So GE created dual experts. They taught coding to the expert engineers, building a workforce that acts as a human bridge between the statistical outputs of the AI and the physical reality of the jet engine.
Okay, so that solves the talent issue, but wait, it introduces a massive trust issue.
How so?
Well, consider a scenario where an AI model gives a brilliant, statistically flawless recommendation to one of those GE engineers, telling them, hey, shut down this turbine immediately. But the AI is a black box. It can't explain its math. It's essentially a genius student who has the right answer, but just outright refuses to show their work.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Right. Does an experienced engineer actually follow an algorithmic leader they don't understand?
The organizational research emphatically says no. A persistent finding across the human AI literature is that trust mediates use. If the system is opaque, workers typically respond in one of two ways. And honestly, both of them destroy the value of the investment.
What do they do?
Well, they either actively subvert the AI, so they ignore it and revert to their old, less efficient habits because they just assume the machine is wrong, or they suffer from automation bias.
Oh, where they just trust it too much.
Exactly. They defer to the machine uncritically, suspending their own judgment and just clicking approve on everything it suggests.
Which totally defeats the purpose of the Centaur model. If the human is just blindly clicking approve, they aren't actually in the loop, they're just a biological rubber stamp.
Spot on. And this brings us to the second pillar of the playbook, transparent and explainable AI. Explainability is not a luxury feature. It is a non-negotiable precondition for symbiosis.
Got an example?
Yeah, American Express is a prime example of doing this correctly. When Amex analysts use AI for fraud detection, the system doesn't just spit out a red flag with a 95% probability of fraud label.
That wouldn't be very helpful.
Right. The AI provides highly explainable signals. It shows the human analyst exactly which features it weighted most heavily. So perhaps it was a sudden velocity of spend or a weird geographical mismatch.
I see. So the Amex analyst can look at the AI's logic, unpack the variables, and say, okay, I see why you flagged this transaction in Paris, but I happen to see a note in the file that this customer bought plane tickets to France last week.
Exactly.
The context changes the math. I am overriding your recommendation.
And that dynamic right there is the essence of human-AI symbiosis. It serves a dual purpose. First, it allows the human to override the model appropriately based on equivocality and context, but crucially, it also acts as a continuous teacher.
Oh, because the human is learning how the AI thinks.
Yes. When the AI constantly exposes its reasoning to the human, it actively builds the human's analytical fluency over time. The model ceases to be just a software tool, becomes an interactive mentor. It elevates the analyst's own capability to spot complex patterns.
But doing that, creating that seamless interaction, that requires what the paper calls socio-technical integration, which sounds like really heavy academic jargon, but it's really just about the messy reality of introducing new technology into complex human social networks.
It's the human element of change management.
Right. Every time you drop a new tool into an office, you disrupt power dynamics, status, established workflows. Procter & Gamble managed to avoid the typical nightmare here by fundamentally shifting how they framed AI to their workforce.
What did they do?
They deliberately treated AI as an assistant that employees actively draw upon, rather than an antagonist deployed by management to monitor them.
And P&G succeeded because they anchored the technology within existing workflows. They actually mapped out the social practices of their teams. Who talks to whom, who holds the informal authority, whose work changes when an algorithm is introduced.
Yeah, you have to know the culture.
If a company ignores those social elements and just forces a new interface onto a team, the intervention almost always fails. Employees will feel their autonomy is being stolen, and they'll quietly sabotage the deployment.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the future? Let's fast forward 10 years. Imagine we've perfectly executed the Centaur playbook. We built the hybrid talent models at GE, we deployed explainable AI at Amex, and we mastered the socio-technical integration at P&G.
This is like a utopia.
Right, the machine is doing all the heavy analytical lifting every single day. But I had a major concern about what happens to our brains.
Okay, lay it on me.
If an AI is constantly serving up highly accurate, mathematically sound answers to frontline workers, don't we inevitably just become passive? Like if human intuition is a muscle trained on making difficult decisions, doesn't relying on a machine to handle all the complexity put a cast on that muscle? Won't our gut feelings slowly atrophy?
That cognitive atrophy is the single most critical risk of the AI era. It really is. And it's why Westover's final and most urgent recommendation demands the active stewardship of human intuition and judgment.
So we have to protect it.
Actively protect it. The text emphasizes that intuition is not magic. It's highly advanced subconscious pattern recognition built on years of confronting messy, difficult, and highly ambiguous situations.
Right.
When an organization starts routing around experienced human judgment in favor of a faster algorithm, they incrementally destroy the experiential base that makes their human workforce valuable in the first place.
But how does a company actively steward something as abstract as intuition? Do you mandate an hour a week where employees just practice making wild guesses without the computer?
No. You design continuous co-learning systems.
Yeah.
Organizations must treat human overrides not as a sign of employee insubordination, but as the most valuable data they possess.
Oh, I love that.
When that Amex analyst overrides the fraud algorithm, the company needs a mechanism to capture that divergence, feed it back into the system, and allow both the human and the machine to learn from the friction.
But that requires trusting the employee to make the final call.
Exactly. It requires distributed decision authority. You have to give frontline workers the individuals directly confronting the chaotic reality of the customer or the product the genuine power to act on or reject AI recommendations within defined guardrails.
So no micromanaging.
Right. If every algorithmic output has to be routed up to a mid-level manager for review, you instantly lose the speed advantage of the AI and you completely disempower the worker. Managerial choke points are the enemy of the Centaur organization.
It also means preserving career pathways where junior employees can still struggle through complex problems. If the AI solves every entry-level problem instantly, a junior analyst never develops the domain expertise required to become a senior analyst.
Yes, you cannot just teach people to be machine operators. You must allow them to experience the friction of the domain deeply. As Westover notes, deep human intuition is a non-transferable asset.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Exactly. Once a workforce loses its collective intuition because a generation of workers was de-skilled by algorithms, a company cannot easily rebuild it. And you certainly cannot patch it with a software update.
So the value of human judgment isn't just, the mundane administrative tasks left over after the robot eats the analytical pie. Human judgment remains the absolute core of organizational performance.
The very core.
The decisions that dictate whether a company survives a crisis or capitalizes on a massive shift in the market, those decisions steeped in genuine uncertainty and equivocality, they will always depend on human synthesis, empathy, and creativity.
To borrow a framing from Kevin Kelly that Westover references, we are engaged in a race with the machines, not against them. Automation alone is simply a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
The true competitive advantage of the next century belongs to organizations that build a symbiosis, where decision quality compoundingly improves because both the human and the machine are constantly teaching each other.
So, as you listening look at your own career and your daily tasks, remember that as artificial intelligence inevitably absorbs more of the raw complexity, the data crunching, the summarizing, the sorting, your unique, irreplaceable value
It
shifts.
evolves.
Right. Your superpower lies in leaning hard into equivocality and uncertainty. It's your ability to read a room, to persuade a skeptical client, to navigate office politics, and to lead a team through a crisis when there is absolutely no historical data to rely on.
You are the head chef. You must let the AI chop the onions so you can focus on the dining room.
I love that. And we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today. If human intuition is essentially your brain's internal algorithm, trained on years of messy, hard-to-articulate experience,
Right.
and if AI is successfully taking over the routine, predictable tasks that used to provide that training, what new, complex, and highly ambiguous experiences do you need to actively seek out starting tomorrow just to ensure your own human algorithm stays sharp and irreplaceable?
That's the real question.
Usually when we think about the future of work, there is this expectation of clinical precision. But as we've seen today in this deep dive, the landscape of the future, whether it's in a hospital ward or a corporate boardroom, is beautifully murky. Let the machines handle the clean lines. Your job is to master the muddy waters.
An essential challenge for all of us.